Hello and welcome to the latest live stream, getting adjusted to some of the new equipment and changes to the way things are currently set up. But I'm glad to have you here with me for this conversation. Today, I want to look at working with children when it comes to introducing them to the natural world and some distinctions between what we would find when, you know, compared to like a classroom setting, which can be pretty formal, and then the role for parents and guardians when they're working with children to incorporate this kind of environmental education into their lives and the lives of their children. If you, of course, enjoy this or any of the other material that you find in the archives for the podcast, feel free to hop over to patreon.com/permaculturepodcast, where you'll find all kinds of weekly updates, monthly AMAs, and other materials on permaculture, children, and what we can do to create a more just, bountiful, and beautiful world. So, today, for this conversation, when it comes to talking with children and working with them when it comes to the outside world, I see some distinctions between what we have in the classroom environment, which is very formal and controlled, and what we find when we are going outside and playing in those spaces. That as teachers of children in those realms, we have a different approach to this because environmental education and permaculture, it tends to be informal, outdoors, hands-on, and it requires us to be present and aware not just of those who are in our care and what it is that we want to be talking about, but also all the conditions which surround us, which we are not as in control of in a formal or as we would find in a formal setting. That when we are teaching in the environment and outdoors, we have just more to be aware of. And so, as a result of that, when I'm working with people in a live environment, and particularly children, I like to think about the fact that we're role models for the people who we're working with. That that particularly with children, that we lead by example. And so, if we can find our way to go boldly into the world, then they will follow us there. That when we take the time to stop and enjoy a particular bird song, or to slow down and admire a turtle or a snake that's crossing our path, that our curiosity, care, and excitement are contagious to those people who are around us. And similarly, our attitude about the world and the other than human registers clearly with children. And that if we gently return an overturned rock or collect trash to be properly disposed of, they're going to see that this is something that we care about and are more likely to care about it as well. Hey, Bless, thanks for joining me this afternoon. Trying something a little different. I've got some graphics and things that'll be showing up here in a few minutes. As I work my way through this, I realize now that putting together a live stream like this takes a bit more time if I want to do it the way that I'd like to. So I don't have everything as detailed as I would like, but some of this is information I'll be sharing with you on Patreon here in the near future. But in addition to being a role model, something to think about is the fact that we're all afraid of something. And that, whether it's spiders or slimy things or perhaps just a condition in nature, we all have an aversion to something. And that to lessen those fears, we can learn more about where, these fears come from. So, like, if we're afraid of heights, to talk about that. We don't necessarily have to go and stand on the ledge and look down to a great distance, but we can talk about, that we don't feel comfortable climbing a tree. We don't feel comfortable, going to that edge, and that provides room for our kids and kiddos to express themselves more fully and what it is that they are and are not interested in. While at the same time, I look at, um, not concealing our fears, but rather to express them. If we're not super comfortable with snakes, that it's okay if a child wants to get closer, but we are not going to be one to follow them. Um, and that, increasing our knowledge about something can help us be less fearful and to encourage a similar kind of exploration among children. I also think that when we're working with children, that it's important to set expectations about what we're going to be doing and when and how and why, so that we can, you know, undertake an activity that shows respect for each other and further helps to engender respect for the natural environment. That if we're, not going to leave trash, not that we should, but if we're going to go out and the expectation is that we'll be packing out our own trash, but that we should collect some while we're walking, that's established ahead of time. That even though we may be engaging in an educational activity, what else are we going to be doing while we are in that environment? In setting expectations, I also think that it's good to establish boundaries. Where are we going to go? What are we going to do? What is the time frame for this activity? How are we going to handle if we encounter something that makes us uncomfortable, or if the weather turns dark? Are we going to stay out in it and expect to get wet? Or are we going to retreat to our car or a pavilion or park and continue the adventure later? And that by establishing those boundaries, again, we show respect for not only ourselves, but also the people who we are working with and teaching. Hey Ali, welcome from Calgary. I'm sitting here in Northern Virginia today as the weather reaches about 90 degrees, but is otherwise absolutely gorgeous. Um, and as we have those boundaries, it's also important, though, to kind of run wild, to make room and have space to engage in our childlike nature. That as long as everyone can be comfortable and safe, that it's okay to push our edges and to do things that might, not be appropriate if we were in a formal classroom environment. Ooh, Slovakia. Awesome. Glad to have you with us. It looks like this time is a good one for helping folks from around the world be able to tune in. So thanks everybody who made some time out of your schedule today to join us. Um, yeah, and that's where, bless your idea, about not being great about making plans or setting expectations. For me, it's really just about having a couple of short kind of, just sentences, something really clear. You know, we're going to head out and, express what the activity is going to be. We're going to go out and look for spiders in the backyard. And, I figure we'll be there and take 20 or 30 minutes to do this. And then after that, we can play, or, that's when we'll come in for lunch, just to have a couple of clear little guidelines. And that I think that those are important for us as adults to set, because then we create agreements that we can hold ourselves to as well. I think that's been one of my hardest things as a parent, has been to keep what I have also set as boundaries, that when we're going to do something, to do them and to make sure that that time is set aside, um, and to have room to work through those things. Um, but when we do run wild, I think that it's important that we don't collect. That I would rather invest in having a couple of cameras on hand, or feeling comfortable passing around a smartphone or something like that, so that what we are taking with us are not resources from the world around us, that we can take memories but not objects. Um, and so that we're not, taking those shells from the beach, those stones from wild places, flowers from a field, that we create memories in some ways. That again, though, that idea goes back to the zones of permaculture. I'm more likely to feel comfortable picking flowers or something like that that's from my backyard, a place that I can manage, as opposed to more wild places, those areas that we might think of as zone 4, or in particular zone 5, which I am very keen on leaving alone. There are just so many places that are already designed for human habitation and human use that I feel much more comfortable stepping away from those, and leaving them as wild and as natural as possible. At the same time, what I when we're in those spaces, to limit our stories and to engage in activities as we have them planned, but not stopping to get caught in narratives in the moment. And for me, this is really more of a space for adults not to try to identify everything, not to try to come up with reasons or explanations for everything that we're encountering. Those are the kinds of things that we take back to the porch or the kitchen table with us. And that's where we tell the stories. We tell the stories after the adventure is over, because the adventure is the new memories. And that's the space that we have gone into in order to try something different and do something new. And similarly, not creating new stories or developing expectations, I think it's important to allow time for silence when we are out on our adventure, when we are engaging in an activity, that we allow everyone who's involved to take some time and space for themselves. And I'd like to build this into outings and adventures or educational experiences, usually somewhere near the end. You know, if I know we're going to do something for, say, a half an hour, that around the 20 or 25-minute mark, if we haven't had much of a break and it's been go, 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 that I want to step back and provide kind of a meditative space for all of us to just kind of be in the place where we're at, wherever that might be. You know, if we're just birding in the backyard, sit down and just allow everyone some time for that. And then once that's done, to kind of call everybody together and have a formal break for what it is that we're doing and draw the activity to a close. And then that allows us to have a clear cut from what it is that we're doing in order to kind of return to the space that we come from. And I think about initiatory experiences and adventure and storytelling, and how having that delineation creates room for us to internalize what it is that we've engaged in and then step back into the world. I don't want to walk through any activities or anything today. I imagine that I'll be following up with more of these children and environmental education and children permaculture lessons in the future. But what I do want to talk about a bit is some of the stages of learning that kind of come together for me from the environmental education work of people like David Orr, who I've mentioned on Patreon and on the show, as well as my own experiences studying environmental education, and then from leading presentations with children and families. For me, I tend to find that there are kind of three stages of learning for children. There is the immersive experience, or the immersion period. There's the exploration period, and the period of reflection. And so immersion tends to come in like this early childhood period. And, you know, pre-K, it's giving children room to be a part of the world and teaching them the basics of what they need to be safe, you know, in some cases follow directions, learn language, learn words, be able to communicate with us. But once we get around kindergarten is where I find that children can use our help as parents and guardians and teachers to immerse them into the natural world. That we can, as they've developed, you know, they can carry a backpack and some of the tools and supplies that they might need, have a jacket tied around their waist, and we can go out into the world for a while. This is where I like to do just a lot of free play, and to be out and be like, you know, what flowers do you see? What birds do you hear? Do you hear birds? What are their sounds like? And just get children used to being in the natural world, whether that's, in the backyard if we're doing walks along a rail trail, doing day hikes through local parks, your first kind of weekend camping experiences and things. That this is all about just getting the children in our lives out into the world. From there, though, once we've had this immersion and they're comfortable and familiar, this is where I start to see then a move towards exploration, where children are driving more of the interest. They're going to be telling us what they want to do, and by having immersed them over a number of years, that they're more comfortable with being in the outside world. They're more like they're engaging in activities. A lot more of that free play is turning into structured things. Maybe they're building forts, which is something David Sobel is a childhood education and environmental educator whose work I really like and recommend. Um, if I remember, I'll include a link and some of his titles in the notes or in one of the updates on Patreon. Um, but this exploration, we can really start to follow their lead and help support them in engaging in um, these activities, and give them some tools, set aside some space in the garden that they can have their own garden. um, Putting together an itinerary of, I don't want to say approved activities, but I find that that's what it tends to be, is that as a parent we can create an itinerary for our children that they can then pick and choose from. It's more um, less prescriptive in nature and allowing kids to make the choices of what we're going to do. I try to have a list usually every weekend. As I think some of you know, I'm divorced from my children's mother, and so I don't get to see them as often as we used to because I live in Virginia and they're in Pennsylvania. But what we tend to do is I have them for the long weekends and then for longer stretches every few weeks during the summer. And what I really like to do with my kids is have a list of, what are 5 or 6 things that we can do on a given weekend while you're down, and then let each of them pick, 1 or 2 of those things that we're going to do. One of them will pick if we're going to make a special meal or go out to dinner. The other one might pick activities, and then that allows them to be able to make choices that are within range of what our family approves of, and still allow them to be actively engaged in what it is that we're doing. I think that this period is really important because we can get a better idea of what it is that the children who we care for are interested in, and be able to provide space for them to drive more and more of our activities as they get older and older. Because then when they get to that reflective period, around 8th grade or once they're teenagers, that this is a place where we as caregivers can step back. And because the work that we've done through the first kind of 2 phases, by immersing them early and then allowing them to explore, this is the stage where they can take the lead really deeply on what their interests are, what it is that they want to do, and then we can step back and support them. And so, by having an understanding of what it is that they care about and what they're interested in, what they love, we can go to them and go, hey, I know that you've been really interested in gardening lately. What can we do, this spring to help you with that? What do you want to grow? What tools would make your gardening experience better? If you're growing a food forest, what trees would you like to include? What fruits are you interested in? This is a period where, though previously, of course, our libraries are always open to our children and the people who we care about, but this is where we might start suggesting titles that we've read earlier or that were transformative for us and place in their hands. This is where Ishmael is great for children um, as they move into being young adults, and giving them more material then that they can make more and more of their own choices from. And then I think that, this is a period where we can also help them find other organizations to be included in, in that those immersive and explorative periods. I think that scouting is great and wonderful organizations to be a part of, but also what are the other things in our community that are available? Community gardens, 4-H, Boys and Girls Clubs, if there are any agriculture-based organizations, any arts and culture nonprofits, anything like that that we can help our children find that continue this work of helping them to be, complete, wonderful, and whole human beings. Um, you know, for my son, he's really interested in construction, and he's turning 12 this year. So, we go and I take him and we explore construction sites when they're active, so he can see what guys are doing. What are they doing with the high rigging? My daughter's an artist, so let's go take the camera and take pictures of birds and flowers, and then bring them back and sit and sketch and draw. Let's play with color and watercolors. My daughter turns 13 in about 2 weeks. 2 weeks from this Saturday, she's a teenager. And so those are the things that I'm engaging in now, is looking at this next step to give her the space to reflect on what she's learned over the years and really cares about. But I think that by pulling all of these pieces together, we can create the foundation where the integration of the ideas of permaculture, those ethics and principles, are easier to do because it's just an integrated part of what they're experiencing. And so in the next couple of videos about children and permaculture, I want to get a bit more deeply into how we can introduce the 12 principles to children, as well as how we talk about the ethics. Because from the background of environmental education, there's this idea that there are no tragedies before the fourth grade, which is one of the reasons why I kind of break down these stages of learning across these age groups as I have, is because we really want to create a biophilic ethic within children in the immersion period, and so that they just love the natural world, because if they love it, they're going to care about it. If that's getting them to love hummingbirds or monarch butterflies or whatever that may be, it's about just that love and what we can do to support those creatures in our environment. We're not going to talk about habitat destruction. We're not going to talk about, the polar bears or, the charismatic megafauna and the issues of climate change. Those are the kinds of things that we will start to explore with them when they're, in the fourth grade or around 10 years old. That's what, as we start to move through this. And this reflective period is where, if children want to become activists, that we can support that and help foster and grow that. And yeah, so those are some of the things that I want to go through in future videos. But based on what I've shared so far today, since we have a couple of people in the chat, do you have any questions for me about what I've shared so far, or anything that you would like to see in a future conversation of one of these live streams here in a few weeks? Of course, if this is something that generates a lot of questions, or there's a lot of material, I can also do some deeper produced videos that aren't just off the cuff, with more graphics and more information, or I can devote some episodes of the podcast to getting into these conversations in the future. So if you do have anything, drop them in the chat. I'm going to take a drink here while you do that. All right, everybody. I'd like to thank you all for joining me for this live stream. With the new setup, things were a lot easier. I didn't have the same technical difficulties as you saw. Kind of like the graphics are coming together. I hope you enjoyed this presentation more. Of course, if you have any thoughts or suggestions, feel free to send me a text message. That's a slide to make, my contact information. But feel free to send me a text message, 717-827-6266. You can email me, show@thepermaculturepodcast.com, or if you're a Patreon supporter over at patreon.com/permaculturepodcast, feel free to drop me a DM or leave a comment in the notes for the live stream. Otherwise, I will catch you all again soon. And so, yeah, I've got an ending card with some information about the next live stream. And so I will catch you all again soon. Thank you for joining me.